Okay, let's just get right into it. We're looking at the most catastrophic event in human history, an absolute eruption of violence that literally redrew the map of the world. Welcome to our explainer, where we are going to systematically break down World War II. It's a subject of just immense scale and complexity, but by digging into the data and the historical records, we can really start to grasp how it completely reshaped human history and left a legacy that we are still dealing with today. Since this event was so colossal, we're going to use a quick roadmap to navigate it. We'll start with the seeds of the conflict, watch as the world takes sides, track the turning of the tide, confront the devastating human toll, and finally, look at justice and new beginnings.
Right, so part one, seeds of the conflict. We'll start by exploring how unresolved tensions and really catastrophic economic conditions created a perfect storm for war. You've got to look at this as a massive chain reaction. The war definitely didn't just happen overnight. It was fueled by severe economic desperation and, well, the incredibly harsh punishments of the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War. That treaty basically left Germany mutilated and deeply humiliated. They lost their colonies, and they were slapped with these massive reparations that just completely crippled their economy. And that pressure? It fed directly into the world economic crisis between 1929 and 1932. We're talking widespread joblessness and just absolute desperation everywhere. And when people lose everything, they tend to look for radical solutions. That vulnerability directly paved the way for the rise of the Nazi dictatorship in Germany. All the while, during the 20s and 30s, the League of Nations, which was supposed to be the world's safety net, experienced a catastrophic failure. It just completely failed to maintain collective security or stop the aggressive military expansion of these newly radicalized powers.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the debate among historians about when this war actually started. Most traditional narratives point to 1939 with Germany's invasion of Poland, right? But if you trace the aggressive expansion, the seeds were actually sprouting much earlier. In 1931, Japan invades Manchuria. Then, 1935, Italy invades Abyssinia. By 1937, we've got the outbreak of the massive Second Sino-Japanese War. So these cascading early flashpoints show us how a series of regional aggressions steadily merged together. They just built relentless pressure until they finally erupted into one terrifying global firestorm by the time Germany actually invaded Poland in '39.
Moving on to part two, the world takes sides. As the conflict ignited, nations were basically forced to align themselves into massive military coalitions. The crucial point to grasp here is the sheer scale of these two opposing juggernauts that ended up drawing in nearly every single country on Earth. The world basically fractured into two distinct camps. On one side, you have the Axis powers. This coalition was led by Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. These were nations completely driven by aggressive, expansionist designs, a formidable bloc determined to reshape the global order by force. Standing against them were the Allies. This colossal alliance was led by Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, France, and China. Just think about the sheer geopolitical weight there. We are talking about vast empires and massive republics pooling all their immense industrial and human resources to form an unprecedented global resistance against the Axis advance. You really have to remember the sheer scope of this struggle. It was the absolute definition of a true global conflict. We're talking about a war involving nearly all of the world's countries. It wasn't just isolated to one continent. It was fought across multiple theaters simultaneously. From the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of the Pacific, from the freezing Russian steppes to the skies over London, the battles were literally raging everywhere at once. And this level of total, all-consuming warfare, it did way more than just change borders. It fundamentally altered the political and social structures of the entire world. Society, as humanity knew it, was basically being dismantled and violently rebuilt in real time.
That brings us to part three, turning the tide. By 1942, the Axis advance seemed completely unstoppable, but some massive turning points were about to change the course of history. Imagine the extreme tension in 1942. The Allied forces desperately needed a breakthrough, and interestingly enough, it started with information. First, U.S. code-breaking successfully reveals secret Japanese battle plans. Because of this crucial hidden intelligence, the element of surprise shifts entirely. Second, initial American air attacks commence, catching the opposition completely off guard. Third, the resulting strikes are devastatingly effective, leading to the total destruction of the Japanese aircraft carriers Kaga, Soryu, and Akagi. Finally, the loss of those critical ships delivers a crushing blow. The Axis advance in the Pacific completely halts. Through brilliant tactical intelligence, a seemingly unstoppable momentum was brought to a grinding, decisive halt.
Meanwhile,
Halfway across the world, another monumental shift was taking place. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged from 1942 to 1943, marked a massive, catastrophic defeat for Axis forces on the Eastern Front. Honestly, this wasn't just a battle. It was a grueling, horrific endurance test that ultimately stalled the relentless Axis advance into the Soviet Union. By holding the line at Stalingrad, Soviet forces absolutely shattered the myth of Axis invincibility. It was a pivotal reversal of momentum, turning a desperate defensive struggle into a staggering defeat for the invaders, and proving to the whole world that the tide of the war could, in fact, be turned.
Which leads us into Part 4, the devastating human toll. We really need to shift our tone here to address the staggering, almost incomprehensible loss of life this global warfare produced. The numbers we're looking at are deeply haunting: 60 million to 75 million deaths. The sheer scale of that loss is almost impossible to truly wrap your head around. I mean, it represents roughly 3 to 3.7% of the entire Earth's population at the time, completely wiped out. Millions upon millions perished, soldiers and civilians alike, making this an unparalleled tragedy that touched almost every single family and community on the planet. It's a sobering reminder of the absolute darkest depths of human conflict.
What's also critical to understand is that the loss of life was profoundly unequal across the globe. The Soviet Union suffered the absolute highest losses, enduring a staggering 20 to 27 million casualties. This was a sacrifice of unimaginable proportions that deeply and permanently impacted the war's outcome. The rest of the world combined saw 40 to 55 million casualties. Understanding this immense burden borne by the Soviet Union is absolutely crucial to grasping the true human cost of the conflict. It wasn't just a war over borders, it was a war of demographic annihilation for entire regions.
Finally, Part 5, Justice and New Beginnings. Out of all this unimaginable devastation, the world was forced to establish totally new rules for international relations and justice. The relentless global violence finally came to a definitive end in 1945, triggering immediate and massive global shifts. First, in May 1945, we see Germany's unconditional surrender, bringing the war in Europe to a close. A few short months later, in August, atomic bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing a terrifying new weapon upon the world. The devastating impact of this leads directly to September 1945, when Japan officially signs the surrender document. With the Axis powers finally defeated, the old world order absolutely shatters. The immense exhaustion and depletion of the old empires acted as a catalyst, and the massive movement of decolonization across Africa and Asia immediately begins. The map of the world was being redrawn yet again, but this time by nations seeking their own independence.
But to ensure these unprecedented atrocities were actually addressed, the victorious nations had to invent an entirely new kind of justice. The goal was crystal clear, captured in a defining historical mandate to assemble irrefutable evidence of Nazi war crimes, offer a history lesson to the defeated Germans, and delegitimize the traditional German elite. So this wasn't just about simple vengeance, right? It was a meticulous legal dismantling of a horrific regime. By assembling this irrefutable evidence, they laid the very foundation for modern international criminal law, ensuring that the history lesson would echo for generations.
To prevent a future catastrophe of this magnitude, new global structures had to be forged right there in the fire. The United Nations was created specifically to foster international cooperation. Keeping the failure of the League of Nations fresh in their minds, this new organization was built with a much stronger framework, where the victorious powers became permanent members of the Security Council. They consolidated their influence not just as a reward for victory, but as a rigid mechanism designed to maintain global stability, basically trying to ensure that a world-spanning conflict of this scale could never, ever be permitted to happen again.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought on why all of this still matters today. The ashes of World War II immediately sparked the tension of the Cold War, setting up the ultimate cliffhanger for the decades that followed. The decisions made, the unprecedented suffering endured, and the institutions built in the direct aftermath of this conflict, they continue to dictate global politics today. So think about this. How did the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as rival superpowers from the rubble shape the rest of our 20th century? Keep